Trigger warning. This podcast episode features discussions of emotional abuse and sexual harassment in toxic workplaces. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Emotional Abuse is Real. I'm your host, Sarene Leeds. I'm a professional writer and storyteller, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm also so excited to kick off a brand new series with today's episode. For the next couple of months, Emotional Abuse is Real will be delving into the world of toxic workplaces. For this inaugural episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Diane Rosen. Dr. Rosen is an author, executive coach, lawyer, consultant, mediator, and above all, an expert on toxic workplaces. But as always, before we get into the episode, I have a few quick announcements. Please make sure you're following me on Instagram at Sarene Leeds Writes. That's SareneLeedsWrites. Also, please make sure that you're subscribed to this podcast on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Finally, don't forget to support Emotional Abuse is Real by leaving a 5-star rating and writing a review over on Apple Podcasts. Another way to connect with me and this podcast is through my email list, which you can subscribe to by downloading my free resource, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV. This download is a collection of some of my best writing tips and tricks, all of which I learned from covering television. And if you're interested in being a guest on Emotional Abuse is Real, you can always either DM me on Instagram, email me at hello@SareneLeedsWrites.com, or, and this is brand new, you can fill out my quick and simple application form. I've left links to my Instagram, email, and the show's application form, as well as my free download in the show notes. Although I'll be covering toxic workplaces for the next couple of months, this podcast, at its core, will always be a safe space to discuss any form of emotional abuse. In today's episode, I chat with executive coach Dr. Diane Rosen. If you're looking for someone who can help you navigate a bad work situation, Dr. Rosen is the mentor you need in your corner. As someone who's had her own fair share of terrible professional experiences, Dr. Rosen offers a nuanced perspective on how to identify a toxic workplace, as opposed to a work environment that just may not be the right fit for you. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you will too. So, without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Diane Rosen.
My name is Diane Rosen. I've got a kind of interesting career history. I'm a lawyer, a mediator. I'm an executive coach, and I have a doctorate in adult learning and leadership. And I wrote my dissertation on lawyer well-being in big law. Hard to believe, but yes, lawyers do experience subjective well-being in a positive way.
I am very excited to talk to you on the topic of toxic workplaces. This is a special series that I'm doing on my podcast because I experienced emotional abuse in my workplace, which was toxic.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I'm very open about it. It was actually at Rolling Stone magazine. Mm-hmm. So that is what inspired me to start this podcast. And more, I'm learning that there are a lot of people who are experiencing toxic workplaces. So I am thrilled to speak to an expert like you. So how did you get started in the business that you run, and how did you become an expert in toxic workplaces?
Right. So I spent a lot of years in big law as a real estate lawyer. I left that when I had my first child, and I ended up writing books about raising kids in New York City. I'm kind of like an information junkie kind of person, and I love research. I'm very wonky. Then I co-founded a nonprofit organization around girls' education. And then I trained to be a mediator. I returned to law practice after a divorce, and I took myself to University of Pennsylvania, where I got a master's in applied positive psychology, which led me to a coaching certification, which led me to the doctorate. So why does that make me know anything about toxic workplaces? Well, I was an associate in big law, and back in the day, big law was often the definition of toxicity, especially for young women. Even though there were many young women lawyers, by the time it got up to the partnership level, there were many fewer women for a variety of reasons, including not being able to kind of live their lives as well as practice law. And at my first job out of law school, I will give you an example of toxicity. I was a real estate lawyer, and all the real estate lawyers and tax lawyers sat on a particular corridor. And at the end of the corridor was a tax partner. I will not say his name, but he was infamous. And with regularity, he used to scream and yell major obscenities. You didn't even know you could string all those words together. He would pull his phone out of the wall, because we had phones in those days, and throw it.
Yes.
And if you were in, the way of the phone, you could get hit by a phone.
Yes. I'm sorry. I'm just going to interrupt you for our younger listeners. Those phones were very heavy, and they had wires that plugged into the wall.
That's right.
Yes.
So pulling it out of the wall was, definitely a deliberate act.
Yes.
And nobody ever did anything about him. Right.
Yep.
And then there was that kind of the whole harassment angle. And, some of it was very overt, and some of it was, honey, get me a cup of coffee. Those are the kind of things that make you feel bad about yourself when you've gone through all this professional training and you're in a workplace. The other way I see it is in my study of positive psychology and my studies of adult learning, I did a lot of reading and writing around the topic of what is it like to be in a workplace? What creates workplace engagement? What creates a positive experience for employees? And so by contrast, that makes you know a lot about what does not. And then in my coaching work, and I will say I coach a lot of lawyers, mostly partners in law firms, but I coach lawyers, I coach people in finance. And from that, I've learned an awful lot about what it's like to be in a workplace that is really uncomfortable and unpleasant. And so I bring all of my experience into this knowledge base of what does it mean to be in a workplace that's toxic? And really more importantly, how can I in a workplace exercise my autonomy, stand up for myself, and know when it's so bad that I have to go?
Excellent. So how do you help people understand how to gain that autonomy within themselves?
Right. Well, we all have autonomy and agency. It's just a question of our willingness to see it, own it, and use it. Yeah. So in most situations where people are experiencing a toxic or unpleasant workplace, they feel like they're always in trouble. I'm in trouble. Somebody's going to yell at me. They're giving me a bad eye. Maybe I'm going to get fired. Maybe I'm not going to get a raise. I mean, there's a litany of ways you can be in trouble. And trouble is very much in the eye of the beholder.
Yes.
So one of the things that's really important in having those kind of conversations is saying, okay, so what does it mean if you're in trouble? Let's unpack that. And then the answer is, and so what? Right? So somebody's going to be mad at you. Okay. Somebody might yell at you. Okay, what can I do about that? And then really grounding yourself in your own sense of yourself and standing up for yourself and not taking it. Now, that there's a range of things, and a lot of that relates to the power dynamic in the situation. It's one thing if the person sitting next to you is let's say, an unpleasant person. And it's another thing if you get called into the office of the CEO who like lets it rip and you're a junior person and you don't even understand what happened.
Right.
But in all of those situations, it's about maintaining your equanimity. How can I maintain myself? How can I respond? And do I have any avenues within the organization that should be attended to deal with it? So if you're in a big company, there's HR, or maybe there's a way to report people. If you're in like a small business, the HR person may also be the boss and the owner, and there's not so far to go there.
Yeah.
But, there's always this question of, am I catastrophizing or is this really bad? Right? Because if I'm catastrophizing, I make it worse on myself. And then I feel like I'm always in trouble and I can't ever retain my equanimity. Right? So some of that is about taking a real look at the situation and really evaluating, what are my options here? Right?
Yeah.
Who can I talk back? What can I say? Can I walk out of the room? Can I just say stop it in some version of stop it? Yeah. And I'll give you some examples.
Please.
So when I was as a lawyer, and I circled back to practicing law for a while, about a decade ago, we had a client, and I was working in a boutique firm, and we had a client, and he was just an obnoxious human being. Obnoxious. Mm-hmm. He gave us a lot of business. There was a whole family real estate business. It was a name that you would know. If you know anything about real estate in New York, you'd be familiar with that name. Mm-hmm. And the guy was just obnoxious. Yeah. And something happened that he didn't like. And he called me up and he started screaming at me, just screaming at me. Yeah. And I'm going to not use his real name. I said, John, you don't get to speak to me like that. Yeah. And he's screaming. And I said, you say it again. And I'm hanging up. He did it again. I hung up.
Good for you. Yeah.
He called back and started again. I said, I'm going to hang up on you again. Mm-hmm. And then I went in full mommy and I said, if you want to behave yourself and have a normal conversation, I am more than happy to attend to your issues and, take care of this situation that you're worried about, but you don't get to yell at me. Yeah. Now, I probably could not have said that at the age of 25.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That I'm so glad.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the examples that you just gave really resonated with me because for most of my experience at Rolling Stone, I was too afraid to truly say anything. I started to speak up a little bit more towards the end, but I look at that now at my age and everything I've been through. I'm sure you can relate to this. Like becoming a mom totally changes your mindset. I'm just like, no. So it's so true because, and also I find that certain generations have been raised to just accept the way things are and to not talk back or to not stand up for yourself. And it sounds like what you're saying, and it sounds like what you do in your coaching is that you help people understand the best way to stand up for yourself.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, there are times you have to leave.
Yes.
Now that's always contextual. If I need this job or I'm not paying the rent, I may have to put up with something I'm uncomfortable with. But within that, I can stand up for myself.
Yeah.
How are we going to do that? And that's what the coaching is really about is, let's figure out what matters to you. Let's figure out who you are and how you can say to somebody, stop it. I mean, essentially in a toxic workplace, the ultimate thing you want to say is stop it. Some version of stop it.
I did. And I'm so glad you said that. I think you are the first person to actually validate when I finally did that. Unfortunately, it didn't work with my boss. So what I do is I'm very open about working at Rolling Stone. I just I just never use my boss's name, but I always say, like, if you know me, you know my work history, you can probably figure out who it was. It was not Jan Wenner. I always make sure to say it was not Jan Wenner, but he,
Right.
of course, contributed to the overall toxic workplace environment. So yeah, we had a I mean, see, one of the many problems was this toxic boss would pull me into these private meetings and really put me on the spot and just destroy my confidence because I actually wasn't doing anything wrong work-wise. He was intimidated by me and I didn't stroke his ego. So that was where the problems began. That was why he was so toxic. So I finally said to him, I looked him in the eye, I said, all of these character assassinations have to stop. I say they have to stop, but it didn't have any effect. Yeah, but it didn't have any effect. You see, you said sometimes you have to leave. I actually did have to leave because it was,
Well, it got worse.
It got worse. And also because none of his superiors, the overall attitude was nobody wanted to get involved. Everyone
like
just
the guy who threw the phone.
Exactly.
He was a really smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked on a lot of important things. And so it's sort of like, you know him. He's just like that. And I'm like, well, no. How old was I then? Maybe 26 or something.
Right.
We all cowered. He's walking down the hall. Everybody shut your door.
Yeah.
Today, I probably would have gone into his office and said, you can't do that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Just stop it. But, this comes with experience. But the most important thing, and for your listeners who are younger or in their first jobs or they're just starting out their career, or they got that job in the dream organization. Like I can imagine getting a job at Rolling Stone was like, oh my God, I'm so amazingly lucky by this, right?
My tagline is, it was a dream job that turned into a nightmare.
Right. So, people are in that job and then they're like, oh, this isn't good. Well, the most important thing, if you're really young, you've got to reality check what's going on. And this is with people you trust, your friends, your family. If you have colleagues that you can really trust, and you may not know that your first 2 months at the job, but people that you trust, whose judgment you trust, say, this is what's going on. Is this normal? Because, quite frankly, if it's your first job and there's like a powerful person, and by the way, that could be male or female, it doesn't have to be any particular gender.
Yeah.
You don't know if that's like, am I supposed to take that?
Right. Exactly.
Is what's going on? Like nobody seems to notice that this person is yelling at everybody. Like, is that okay? Does that happen in other places? So you got to do some reality checking with people whose judgment you trust. And that I would always say, try to reality check with people who have more experience in the workplace than you do. Not necessarily like your parent, although your parent may have good. My mother had like the worst advice ever, not helpful. So she was not, because she never worked in that kind of workplace. She had no idea what I was talking about.
Right.
But, somebody maybe who's a few years older or who's had more jobs and has better sense. Yeah. Then the next thing you have to do is evaluate, do I have options? Mm-hmm. Right. As, the newbie, do I have options? And that involves kind of a little bit maybe under the radar, checking with your colleagues, is there a place to go? Does this happen often? What happened did anybody ever complain? What happened to them? Right? You got to understand what your options are. Yeah. And then you have to evaluate, is this a place for me?
Yeah.
Because if your dream job is a nightmare, then it's really not a dream job anymore. Yeah. And it's really diminishing your sense of yourself. Yeah. So the toxicity is relative, and some people can take it more, and some people can talk back more. Some people just can. Some people just can say, you're not the boss of me. Stop. I'm not taking this from you. Most people really don't have that level of confidence, especially if they're younger or in a new job that an organization that they just joined. But at the end of the day, you have to decide, is this the place I want to be? And how am I going to stand up for myself in this situation with appropriate level of respect and professionalism.
Yeah. It's for me, there was only one choice, which was to leave because I did not have the support of my colleagues, and because when I did start standing up for myself, things got a lot worse. So, and that was fine. I mean, at that point, I always say that I stayed there too long because I was there for 7 years because I was like, how could I leave Rolling Stone?
Right.
How could I possibly leave Rolling Stone?
Right.
So, you touched upon it briefly. So I wanted to ask your opinion on human resources. Like, is there ever a time you should go to them, that they can be helpful? Because in my experience, it seems they're there to protect the company.
Yeah,
They're
HR
not there
to work for the company.
Yeah. So they're not really there to protect you personally.
But people in HR, if they're good at their work, if you're now in the territory where something might be actionable, and by that I mean that you could bring a lawsuit, they're going to step up. Sexual harassment, racism, various things, but at a level of, okay, this person is touching that employee. Right. We can get sued. They're going to act much more quickly and adeptly than, somebody who like, I feel bad, right? If you can't explain it with examples, it's going to be hard to get anybody behind you. And also some HR people are great and some HR people are less so.
Yeah.
So you've also got to understand your organization, right?
Yeah.
I know a young woman who was in an organization where the head of HR was like a 60-something-year-old man who really, let's just say he wasn't modern about his understanding of
it's a very polite way of putting it. Okay.
Workplace behavior.
Yeah.
And so he thought everybody was a snowflake and he didn't understand, no, this is like not okay. Maybe this was okay 40 years ago. Not that it was okay, but it was
accepted.
It was accepted. Not today.
Right.
And she really had a hard time. What she had to do was find an ally in the firm, in the organization, who of some senior, she had like a mentor, and that person helped her navigate around the HR person because the HR person just wasn't going to be helpful, or understanding or do anything. So,
yeah, I'm interested. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic for me because I left Rolling Stone 10 years ago. And even though I gave specific examples, what was really nefarious about my boss was that everything fell into the good old gray area. Like it was certainly sexual harassment, but it wasn't sexual assault. I gave as many examples as I could, but back then, like even 10 years ago, because I feel like it was pre-Me Too, even HR was like, there's really nothing we can do about that. And I do have to wonder if now
I think there's a higher level of sensitivity around it.
Yeah.
And I think workplaces are doing more to deal with difficult individuals than they used to. Maybe they get them some coaching or, don't let them work with young people. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. And if they're really smart, they say you change or go.
Right.
But again, businesses are not families. Businesses are businesses. And if somebody is important at their work for that organization and the CEO or the president or the head of that company is unwilling to sacrifice that, then they're never going to change.
Yeah, I knew that there was never, that's why I ultimately had to leave because I knew that they were never going to change. Which fascinated me because my boss was not that important and was not that crucial or critical to the company. But whatever the mindset was, it was having a detrimental effect on my mental health. So I left and I have no regrets. But like I said, this was 10 years ago. I'd love to get your perspectives on how you find that attitudes toward toxic workplaces have shifted, especially in recent years, because I find that the younger generations basically aren't going to stand for it.
Right. And I think actually there's been a lot more around this because people were out of the office and versus being in the office. And when
Right.
you're out of the office, you're a little bit insulated from certain bad behavior, although certain bad behavior can be worse. You know, I would say that one of the things that's really important, this is not quite an answer to your question. I'm kind of circling.
I love that because then maybe it'll shift us to another area and I'll come up with another question.
Right. I think it's really important. Now, this comes from all my work in mediation, which is about framing and reframing and the words that we choose.
Yeah.
And I think that there's got to be some thoughtfulness around the use of the word toxic or toxicity. Why? Because some things are annoying, but they're not toxic. Right. Some people are difficult and annoying, but they're not toxic. Right. And so in order to really get traction and have somebody make a change in your organization, the behavior and the inappropriateness of the behavior needs to resonate with the people who make the decisions, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if everybody's saying it's toxic, and sometimes for toxic, some people that means like I really wanted my lunch break and like they're not letting me have lunch. I'm being really honest with you because that word is hackneyed, right? And like it gets overused. Yeah. And quite frankly, everything isn't toxic. Some things are annoying, unpleasant, not my cup of tea. I don't like that person. That doesn't make it toxic. Yeah. So if you're really going for toxic, it's got to be a higher level. And there's two sides of this. I think I'm talking in circles, but I think I'll make
No. When you're done, I've actually got a really great response for you. Yeah. So this is great.
Because I think that some of it, there's what it looks like to others and what it looks like to me, right? My experience is this job maybe, just shutting me down and shooting my confidence and making me feel small. That is my experience of the job. Yeah. But when I go to report this, the person to whom I'm reporting it is going to evaluate whether I'm too delicate or I'm realistic about work, right? Yeah. Because what is making me feel bad? Now, if somebody is sexually harassing me or touching me or saying, making inappropriate comments about my clothes or asking me what I did all weekend, like it doesn't matter if I'm sensitive or not. That's like, just no, you're not allowed to do that. Right?
Exactly.
But if I feel like, well, they're not giving me good assignments because my boss has a teacher's pet and that's toxic to me, that's not going to go that well. That reporting isn't going to go that well. And I'm just really being honest. So
that's what I want.
In evaluating where you're situated in your work and how bad it is, this is the reality checking part.
Yeah.
Is there anything here that's going to happen in like a lot of workplaces? Or is this person really off the charts? Or these people really off the charts? Yeah. So for example, if you're a woman and you're in a place that's really kind of like a frat house, it's going to feel really toxic. And they're not going to know it because their behaviors to themselves feels very normal. And they're going to say, hey, what's wrong with you? Like this is what we do. Well, and if that's the place, then one of the things you do have to evaluate is, do I want to work in an environment like this? Yeah. Because do I have an ability to make a change? Am I going to have an impact? Or is everybody just going to keep doing what they're doing? Then there's not so much I can do about it. But if I have to stay at that job until I find another job, how can I keep myself resilient? Yeah. I may need to keep saying to myself all day, this is not about me, this is about them. This is not about me, this is about them. If I have to just survive until I get another job or whatever the next thing is, and you have to get support externally from people who care about you if you can't leave.
Yeah.
And you can't always leave.
It's true. It's true. It's true. I'm very fortunate that I was able to finally leave. And, I have no regrets. I think what happened to me is a combination of actual toxicity and some of the things that you said, but it was not the right environment for me. Yeah, exactly.
And look, my caveat to all of this is if somebody's doing anything that's actionable, in terms of lawsuit, then you don't have to tolerate anything, and you shouldn't. And you should make your complaint to the EEOC or whatever the avenue.
Yeah.
Because if it's that bad, nobody should have to tolerate it. But I'm talking about that. I'm talking about the light gray area. We're not
totally
not the dark gray. The dark gray, unacceptable.
Yeah.
You move past the dark gray. It's like, I'm filing a complaint.
Yeah. No, the reason why I'm so glad that, that actually turned into a great answer, because I'm at the very beginning of interviews for this Toxic Workplace series. And I am hearing from some people who say, I want to share my story. I was in a toxic workplace. And I'm like, great, I want to hear your story. But in a couple of situations, I'm like, they weren't really able to articulate what the problem was.
You're sort of thinking, oh, not that toxic, really.
Right, exactly. But maybe in their head, and I understand that. So I'm in the process right now of like responding to some of these pitches and saying, well, I need you to tell me a little bit more. Not that I'm dismissing your story, but it has to be what fits into what I'm looking for this podcast and what will ultimately help the listeners. If it's just like, well, I just had a bad experience.
Join that club.
Right, exactly. We all have. I actually just emailed someone back and I said, before I officially book you, I need you to expand on what you just said. So, I mean, she may end up having a really compelling story, but I'm just validating what you just said, because you're absolutely right. It really does depend. And perspective.
I would say that over the course of my years in the workplace, in various different workplaces, I have had some really bad experiences.
Yeah.
But the entire organization wasn't bad. But some organizations tolerated more bad behavior than others. And to wit, I have moved on and I am not, I changed what I do.
Right.
But
exactly.
There were, I had a client who offered to set me up in an apartment in New York because his marriage was very unhappy. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you're a married guy. Like, no. And the bad news was that client went to the head of my practice area and said, she can't work on our matters anymore. And my boss called me in and said, like, this is what happened. And I said, well, let me tell you what happened to me. And he goes, yeah, that's too bad. But, like, big company.
Yeah. I got just constantly, I was like, that's just the way he is. Grow a thicker skin. And my favorite was give him his chew toy so he'll leave you alone, which was basically stroke his ego, let him think that he's like a great boss, and then, he'll just leave you alone. And but
in fact, there is no chew toy big enough for a person like that.
Exactly.
Even if you tried that a little bit,
right,
it would never be enough.
No. And it wasn't.
And look, some people are extremely excellent at targeting people's vulnerabilities and going in for the kill.
Yeah, he did that with me.
And if you're in that experience, there's not so much you can do if there's a really big power differential. If that person's the boss and you're the not boss, you have a lot less leeway than if you're a colleague, right? Like if the person, I'm just making up a title.
Yeah.
If he's a senior vice president and I'm a senior vice president too,
right,
I have a different interaction than if he's a senior vice president and I'm, 25 minutes out of college.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. What was unfortunate with my situation was that my boss was like, he fit the definition of a middle manager, but he was protected by his superiors because they just didn't want to deal. So Yeah. And like so many others, I always say this, and again, it's been 10 years. I can't say what it's been like at Rolling Stone since then, but about 95% of the females that I worked with are no longer there.
Yeah.
Only two. Two
So
are
when
still
you
there.
were there,
Yeah.
I'm interested in
Yeah.
what did you try and did anything help? Even at the margin, was anything effective? And this goes everything from how you dealt with him and how you dealt with other people in the organization. Did anything alleviate the situation in any way?
No, because everything I did to protect my own mental health ended up backfiring because like this guy, like it was even like little things, like he had no concept of personal space. And what was really hard was that everyone else seemed to just kind of lean into stroking his ego and just accepting all of his creepy peccadillos. And so I was the only one who was trying to put up boundaries, and that wound up hurting me in the end. All of my annual reviews, he actually said nothing about my work. They were all character assassinations, but I never got in trouble because the superiors would read these reviews and they'd be like, ugh, he's just being annoying, let's just ignore it. Like I would never get in trouble. So yeah, I did whatever I could about boundaries because this guy really, he cared more about people liking him and being his friend and stroking his ego.
Mm-hmm.
And when I stopped doing that, when I stopped telling him about my vacations, when I stopped telling him about what was going on in my personal life, he got really offended and he was hurt. He started accusing me of being selective with who I was being nice to. And I was
That's like not a thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so because I was 10 years younger, I internalized a lot of this. So for a very long time, I really did think that I was in the wrong a lot. I was filled with some self-loathing, but at the same time I was like, but why is this guy treating me like this? I'm just focusing. I did what I could to just focus on my career.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing worked. Eventually I did resign.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did resign, he was surprised. And
Mm-hmm.
I said to him, this should not come as a surprise. It's time for me to go.
Right. But somebody, as you're describing him, is such a low level of self-awareness that it really was a surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You're not talking to somebody who speaks the same language as you.
Correct. That's why I had to go. Yeah. And it's fine. Yeah.
And were you able to find outside resources to support you, friends, family?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was in therapy.
Okay.
And I immediately embarked on a successful writing career. Like as soon as I left, I had a lot of outside support. My husband was supportive. It took a little time for my parents to understand why I did what I did.
Right.
Because they're just like, how could you leave a lucrative job at Rolling Stone? And also there were a couple of our friends who we had to like sit down. There was one friend, and I talk about him a lot on the podcast. He's like, how could you leave Rolling Stone? And both my husband and I were like, sit down. You need to hear the details.
Yeah.
And it took me, almost 10 years. I started this podcast 1 year ago today. Thank you. And
happy anniversary.
Thank you. And yeah, so that was really, I just realized, I had healed enough that I was really ready to talk about it. And I knew that there were a lot of other people that had similar stories. And so here we are. Yeah.
So, what you just said made me really think about a kind of a way to frame this issue around toxicity.
Okay.
And
great.
I think what the direction I'm thinking in is it's really about your subjective experience.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of the day, if a place is beating you down and making you feel less than, and making you question your own capability, your own anything, could be depending on the place, like your appearance or whatever is at issue, then it's time to take a step back and evaluate, what if this is me and what if this is them?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because in all things, we all contribute to our situation, right? We think, and I don't, this is not like a blame the victim kind of comment. This is more that, like the young person who kind of lets it go and lets it go, the bad person thinks, this is cool, right? Because nobody ever stopped me.
Mm-hmm.
This is good. Shouldn't have a problem, right?
Yeah.
So it creates this cycle of bad stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so the important thing is, whenever a person is having a really negative experience in that job, it's so important to do some introspection and really get some input of people who know you and understand the industry, perhaps,
Yeah.
to help you understand what's normal, what's not normal. And then once you have that base, then you can say, what am I willing to do?
Right.
Right? Like, this may be normal in this business, but like, it ain't for me. So for instance, I'll give you an example. And I'm going to use big law. Big law is often called a sweatshop and all this other stuff. And yeah, like, you could be working 80-hour weeks, right?
Sure.
And you're feeling, this is a toxic place, right? Because I'm burning out and nobody cares about me. And all of that is probably right. Like, they care about you in a macro way, but not in a micro way. And so the answer there is, well, you know what? Big law is going to be that.
Yeah.
There is going to be an expectation that you bill 2,000 hours a year. And if you don't bill 2,000 hours a year, you're not going to get a bonus and you're not going to advance in the firm. And so you have to decide, am I willing to be in big law, or would I like to practice law in a different environment that is not like this? Or maybe a big law firm that has a different sensibility about billing and something else. So that's kind of what I mean. Like, that's an industry where there's definitely big law is different than smaller law firms.
Sure.
And so if that's not the life for you, don't be there, because big law is not going to be changing anytime soon.
Yeah.
In the aggregate, right?
Yeah.
Are there things you can do in your firm? Yes. Can you, get assistance? Can you have a mentor? Can you, deal with your own hours? But the context of that industry is such that that's how it's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think
it's very important to know that. Not because it makes it right, but because it's just reality.
Yeah, that, another element to the whole Rolling Stone situation that really didn't even have to do with my boss. Another reason why I knew I had to leave was because it was a print magazine that at the time came out every two weeks. And the late nights and the long hours were so exhausting and destructive. And my husband and I were trying to get pregnant. And I was like, I knew.
Not going to do a good job with that.
Nope. I was like, there is no way I can try to get pregnant, be pregnant,
and have a child.
In that environment.
Right.
So yeah, there were many aspects where I don't look back and say, I am so angry and frustrated. Why couldn't they change for me? I don't do that, because I knew that leaving was the only way I could be happy, because there were too many fundamental elements of this workplace that were just not going to change.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean of, you got to kind of understand.
Yes.
And a lot of kind of things have come out about that organization in the recent past
Yes.
that
Yes, they
probably
have.
you're going,
Oh,
that's me,
I actually contributed to one of the articles that came out about it because like I said, I think I hinted at it in the beginning. Jan Wenner was not my direct boss,
mhm,
but it was because of him that it was a toxic workplace culture. It was
yeah.
because of him that my boss was able to treat me the way that he did.
Mm. Yeah. But you just hit upon something. I think the most important word that you said is
Mm-hmm.
culture.
Mm-hmm.
Organizations have a culture. And
Yes.
what is a culture, right? Countries have a culture. They have a currency, like
Mm-hmm.
what wins in those organizations. They have a language.
Mm-hmm.
They have a set of shared beliefs. And when you're in an organization that has a culture that doesn't value people, that doesn't honor people, that doesn't respect people, it's not going to go well
Right.
unless you are made of steel. And you know what?
Yeah.
Some people are like, I don't care. I need to log in 3 years at this job so that I can go to X,
Right.
or that I will have the requisite experience to do Y.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're looking at jobs, I think one of the most important things you can do when you're looking, like when you're interviewing for jobs, is to do everything in your power to learn about the culture of that organization,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's the place. And do you fit or do you not
Mm-hmm.
fit? It's kind of
Yes.
like when you move and you pick a community. Where do I want to live? I don't want to live in that town because I don't like how that town acts, right? And you choose a place to live, or you choose a neighborhood, or you choose schools for your kids where you're going to feel this is a good fit for me.
Yeah.
Not perfect, but a good fit. And so I think one of the things people make, they make mistakes. And I've coached a lot of people who went for their dream job. There was one woman who went into a luxury goods thing because she wanted to like be in that sector.
Yeah.
And let me just say, it wasn't so luxurious there,
Yeah. I believe it. I
right?
believe it. Yeah.
And I think the hardest thing for her to come to terms with is the disconnect between the outward face of that company and actually how they behaved
Yeah.
internally to their people.
Yeah.
So a lot of the job looking really is do your homework about the company. If you can. Look, sometimes you
Sure.
can get information. Sometimes it's a closed circuit and you really can't.
Yeah.
But I think it's very critical to say, what is the culture of this place? When I walk down the hall, like, do people seem happy, or are people heads down and nobody's looking at each other? Like, what does it look like in here? What's the temperature in here?
Yeah.
Are the people like, do they say nice things about each other?
Right.
Right? Do they
Yeah.
respect each other? So that, you know, if you find yourself in an organization that has a really negative culture, then you have to evaluate, can I stay here? Do I need something from this place and I'm just going to deal with it for the time period I need in order to have it be okay in my next step, right?
I just want to thank you so much for saying that because I will openly admit I did not do that kind of research when I was first hired. And I'll be open about that again. It was in 2007. It never would have crossed my mind to do research on
Mm-hmm,
workplace culture. So that's
mm-hmm,
why I really appreciate
mm-hmm,
you saying what you said and that we're
mm-hmm,
talking about it now because I want to help younger people
mm-hmm.
know that that's what they need to do.
Well, some of the work I do with organizations involves doing kind of a look at their culture.
Mm.
I was hired a couple of years ago by it was a healthcare
Mhm.
startup. They were in a very particular sector. They'd started before COVID, but because of COVID, they took off like a rocket ship.
Yeah,
And they went from 30 people, most of whom like knew each other,
right.
to to hiring like they were over 100 people. And they thought they had the best culture ever.
Hmm.
Like it's amazing, so
Hmm.
amazing.
Hmm.
So my job was I interviewed about 50 people, right? So I
Mm.
touched in all of the different areas. And boy, did I get an earful. And my job, this is what I was brought in to do, was make a presentation basically to the founders to say, let me tell you what it feels like to be here if you're not you, right?
Wow.
If you're not the boss.
Yeah.
And they were, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what? They didn't realize that people, they knew they had high turnover, but they thought that was just the industry. It's like, no, it's not the industry because people want to leave.
Yeah.
And by the way, the manager in this group behaving really badly.
Wow.
And I got very granular in these interviews to say like, well, what about it is so negative for you?
Right. Right.
And, a lot of it came down to people don't mean what they say or say what they mean. Like we're going to do this and then they don't, or they, so they don't mean what they say, or when they say we're going to do this, you're thinking, oh, they're going to make this big change. And they think they're making this little teeny tiny thing, like a tweak. And you're like expecting a massive change. So this culture thing, and I've done similar things in some other places, has really helped me understand that there is such a huge disconnect among the leaders and the boots on the ground about what the culture is. And if the leaders don't know or don't care, then the likelihood of there being change is minimal.
So what do you do?
Well, again, what you do to maintain your personal equanimity and boundaries is up to you.
Okay.
Right.
Got it.
What are you willing to do? What are you able to do in the organization? And if you can't protect yourself and you're feeling really, really bad about yourself because of this job, you got to find an exit. Yeah. Now, your exit plan may not be tomorrow. Your exit plan may be, okay, by the end of calendar 2024, I have to be out of here.
Yeah.
And then you start doing your homework. But again, with individuals who are outliers within an organization, you have to use all organizational channels to see if anybody will step in around the situation. And again, if you're in danger or somebody is touching you or assaulting you or doing really bad things to you that are inexcusable, then you report and you just report. Like you can't be afraid.
Yeah.
And, like a lot of women are afraid to report, like, I'm going to get blackballed. This is where you need really great advisors to help you figure out how to do that or what forum to do that. A lot of it depends on kind of what your job is and, where you are situated, because this toxicity, by the way, is not only to lower level people, it can be in the C-suite. Right. Again, you have to figure out, what are my options? What can I do? How do I protect myself? How do I insulate myself and shore up my own resilience and self-confidence and self-efficacy in the face of this bad stuff? And can I do anything to change it here? What can I try? What have I tried? What worked? What didn't? If it's so bad, then you have to think about an exit plan for yourself, whatever that looks like. And I'm not judgy about that because people have a lot, it's like a marriage, right? A lot of people stay in a crummy marriage because there's other reasons for staying.
Yep. We talk about that a lot on this podcast too.
Well, it's very similar.
Oh, yeah.
Because some relationships are just, soul crushers. And the question is, there's some people, can I leave? Do I want to leave? And by the way, for most people in the world, it takes more than a minute to figure out what you're actually willing to put up with and what's hurting you, and being willing to take the step of making a change. It is not easy for a lot of people, for pretty much anybody, to make a big change. And so you got to do your work on yourself to shore yourself up so that you can ultimately be your own best friend.
Yeah. And as you said, a great advisor is also Very, very helpful. So on that note, how can people connect with you?
Well, okay. So, I do a lot of individual coaching,
Mhm.
and they can reach me. I'm in the middle of redoing a whole website, so I'm not going to direct anybody there because it's
Okay.
in the middle of an overhaul.
Okay.
But they can reach me directly by email if
Okay.
they want to.
Okay.
I didn't. Do I say my email, or is that something you publicize? Or
I can do both. That's up to you. That's why I always ask guests how listeners can connect
Mhm.
with you, because it's completely up to you
Yeah.
what you want to
So
share. So
my email is the
okay.
best way to reach me.
Okay.
Hopefully my new website will be launched soon.
Okay.
Uh, I've reconfigured that, and I love working as a coach. I love helping people
I
find their
can tell.
way.
I
I
can tell.
feel like my job as a coach is not to tell anybody what to do, but to help them find their path.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like I'm kind of like an escort. I'm going to
I like
them on
that.
their journey
Yeah.
because it's always somebody else's journey. And in my many years of life and following my own divorce,
Mhm. Mhm.
I what I really understand is judging people is not helpful
Mhm.
because you really don't know what is going on in their life.
Mhm.
And people get there in their own time. My
Yeah.
old therapist, that was really great for me, she used to say, you can't make a flower grow faster than it's going to grow.
Mhm. Yeah, it's true.
You can't make it. Like just
Right.
because you tell somebody, okay, you got to get out of there. So
Mhm.
if they're not emotionally ready to do it, then they're not,
Yeah.
but you can help them get there
Mhm.
and be there to support them. And so that's what I love about coaching is when people kind of have those moments of, oh, oh, I'm
Mhm.
not stuck in quicksand. I
Right.
do have ways to do it. And the other piece that's really very gratifying about coaching is when people see their own behavior and say, you know what, this is not serving me well,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like, what do I need to do? Right? I think of things in terms of self awareness and other awareness. Self awareness is how am
Mm.
I showing up? What's
Mhm.
my baggage? I mean, it's really everything to am I hungry and tired to like, what traumatic things have happened to me in my life. It's all, I'm showing up with all of that.
Yeah.
Just as I am, so is the other person. I don't necessarily know what their stuff is.
Mhm.
So that's one piece of other awareness. But the other piece of other awareness is how am I landing with
Mhm.
other people?
Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
I think I'm like so funny and clever and like nobody's laughing at my jokes. So
Mhm.
maybe I'm not so funny and clever, right?
Mhm.
Well, how do other people see me?
Yeah. That's very important. That's also something that it's taken me a long time to learn.
It takes all of us a long time to
Yeah.
learn that.
Yeah, definitely.
And, I hope you don't judge yourself about that. And I hope you're proud of where you got,
Oh, yeah. It's
and
taking me a long time to stop
mhm,
judging myself
mhm,
and to be proud of where I am now, but yeah,
mhm.
I am.
I,
I
I
am.
am
Thank you.
I am very lucky because I ended a marriage that was just kind of dead.
Yeah.
And I'm very happily married for the past 10 years
Oh,
to
congratulations. That's
the
wonderful.
right
Yeah.
person for me.
Oh,
And
wonderful. I love hearing those
and
stories.
when I was going through that divorce, I cannot tell you the really weird things people said to me, which was a reflection of their issues. Like, oh, you have to stay. You can't get divorced. It's like what? You're not in my life. What? Like, why are you telling me that?
Why are you
Or
making it about yourself?
or people who are worried it's contagious and they
Uh,
want they want to know everything. It's like, okay, you don't get to know all that information because you're not my super best friend.
right. Oh my goodness.
So it
Yeah,
really helped me see, you don't know what's going on in anybody's life. And
totally.
you can have an opinion, but being judgmental about it is not helpful and it
No.
doesn't advance anybody.
Yeah.
And so that's my view.
Well, and I appreciate that. I really appreciate your perspectives.
Thank you.
I can't wait for everyone to hear can't wait for everyone to hear them, because I think that they're going to be super helpful to a lot of people out there. Even if they just think they're in a toxic workplace, maybe this will help them reevaluate, or it'll help validate.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm in a toxic workplace. I need to do something
Right.
about
And
it.
don't blame yourself. Like,
Right.
don't blame yourself because you picked the wrong place or because
Absolutely.
you put up with a lot of bad stuff. Everybody's on their journey. You
Totally.
picked it for a reason. You're going to reevaluate.
Yeah.
You put up with things, you had your reasons. But what can I do for myself today to make sure that I am living my life in a positive way and not putting up with people who are damaging or hurtful to me?
Amazing, amazing advice. Dr. Diane Rosen, thank you so much for talking with me today. I'm going to also drop your email address in the show notes. So you've said, so people can get in touch with you. Thank you again for sharing all of your insights with us today.
Yep. And anytime you have any questions or anything, please reach out.
I will.
I love this topic.
I can tell. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Dr. Diane Rosen on Emotional Abuse is Real. If you would like to connect with Dr. Rosen, I've left her email address in the show notes. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out via email at hello@sereneleadsrights.com, through Instagram at sereneleadsrights, or fill out my guest application form. Please note that this podcast should not be used as a substitute for professional mental health services. If you are a victim of emotional abuse and need help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline at 988, or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also text START, START, to 88788. Once again, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Follow me on Instagram and go grab my free download, 10 Things I Learned from Getting Paid to Watch TV. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.